I'm Courtney Halbach, and I'm the Outreach Specialist with the Dairyland Initiative at the University of Wisconsin-Madison. And I'm excited to be here at World Dairy Expo today. First time back in person presenting after almost 2 years, so exciting. Today I'm going to talk about calf barn ventilation, and I'll be up front. Our group prefers naturally ventilated calf barns supplemented with positive pressure tube systems. So that's going to be the main focus of the presentation today. But there are a wide array of ventilation options for calf barns that I'm sure VES-Artex would be able to talk to you about. So why are we in calf barns? Well, we know that the calf health in calf barns can be just as good or better as what we are seeing in hutches. So you'll see a lot of farmers moving away from hutches into calf facilities, and we know that once we do that, we need to make sure that the ventilation is working well. We also know that growth rates are essential and more important in producing future cow health and productivity later in the day. So a difference of 2.2 pounds or 1 kilogram of average daily gain during those first 50 days of life will yield an additional 1,800 pounds during the calf's first lactation. Before I talk about natural ventilation, I gotta give you Dr. Terry Olivet's 7 things she looks at when troubleshooting calf health on farm. You can see that stocking density and space per calf, focusing on bedded pack space per calf, is number 1, followed by failure of passive transfer, hygiene and bedding management, feeding rates and feeding consistency, disease detection, which you want to make sure is accurate and early, so you want to train the herdsman well. And then ventilation is 6th. So sometimes you might think that might need to be closer to number 1, but for her and her issues that she looks at with calf respiratory disease, ventilation is number 6, followed by vaccination. So today I'm going to focus on ventilation. What are 3 things you need to know about ventilating a calf barn? The first is you want to build the facility to maximize whatever ventilation strategy you're going to use, whether it's natural or mechanical ventilation, and in today's talk, I'm going to focus on natural. We also want to make sure not to overstock. So getting back to Dr. Olivet's list of priorities, we know that stocking density has a key impact on air bacteria counts in the barn. And then the best thing to do with a naturally ventilated barn is to supplement it with positive pressure tube systems. So how does natural ventilation work? Well, in the winter, you've got small eaves open on either side of the barn with a ridge. And as the cold air enters into the warmer barn, it drops, mixes in the barn, and exits out through the ridge via the stack effect. So that can either be driven by thermal buoyancy within the barn or the different pressures of the wind going over the roof line and helping suck that old outside air out. In a summer system, when the sidewalls are wide open, you've got air coming in, circulating, going across the barn and exiting out both through the open ridge and the sidewall away from the prevailing winds. Then in a winter system, you get some air movement, but it's not always guaranteed. So we recommend putting in positive pressure tube systems to help bring fresh air into the barn and deliver that fresh air to where the calf is. So the requirements for a naturally ventilated barn is you need to have an open ridge, and that's 2 inches of opening per 10 feet of building width. If you go with chimney fans instead of an open ridge because you're concerned about air, moisture coming into the barn, you want to make sure that you still have sufficient opening as a traditional ridge. You also want eave openings on both sides of the barn. So that's going to be 1 inch of eave opening per 10 feet of building width. And then you want a roof interior slope of 1 in 4. So that just helps that wind go over the roof and out and suck that bad air out through the open ridge. You want to have the ability to open as much of the sidewalls as possible to capture the prevailing winds, so preferably 50% or more. And then you want to make sure that you don't have any wind shadows. And what do I mean by wind shadows? Well, I'm sure you've seen places where you build barns next to each other. We would prefer to have about 100 feet or 30 meters between buildings so that as the wind comes up over this barn, it has enough time to drop back down into the next barn. So natural ventilation is compromised when you build those barns closer together. Maybe it's not a building that's blocking air. Maybe it's that seasonal cornfield or tree. So you just got to be aware of anything that would be blocking air, fresh air, from getting into the barn. Like I mentioned before, we want really big open sidewalls. And so that means having a short concrete wall, about 18 to 20 inches. It gives you enough to push against if you're cleaning while being able to maximize the sidewall opening. You also want to make sure that you're not blocking air from getting into the individual pens. So you want an open front and back so that as air comes in through the sidewalls, it goes into the calf pen where the calf is. We're really focused about that calf microenvironment, trying to get the air, the fresh air, where she is. It doesn't matter about the barn, we're thinking about the calf. And then we get questions about curtain management. During the winter, you'd have the curtains completely closed where the air would come in via the open eave along both sides of the barn. And then as things start to warm up, you adjust the curtain as needed. And when you get to about 75 degrees, calves can tolerate the weather just fine. So you can open up that sidewall as much as possible. We would prefer having split curtains so that you have the ability to bring in air from the top and the bottom, depending on the season, or to also reduce any moisture from coming into the pen. Now to overstocking, which was number one on Dr. Olivet's list of areas to look at. We know that stocking density is the single most determinant of calf barn air quality. So when you put more calves into a space, you have to increase the ventilation in order to get similar air quality as what you would get with a barn that is appropriately stocked. You want to focus not only on the bedded area, which for any animal, whether it's group or individually raised, we're looking at 35 square feet of bedded pack space per calf. But you also want to look at the overall barn volume. So the average here in Wisconsin was about 1,300 cubic feet per calf, but we have a range from 600 to 3,000. So both bedded area and barn volume goes into looking at that stocking density and its effect on air quality. Pen size also has an effect on bacteria counts within the pen. So as you increase the pen area in size, the number of bacteria in the air within those pens also decreases. So again, size is, you want to have bigger pens not only to give the calf more space to move around, but also to improve air quality and bacterial counts in the air. And then we want to make sure that we provide a deep bed of straw for calves. We want them to be able to nest at a nesting score of 3. Just means that when a calf is lying down, you do not see her legs. They're completely covered by the straw. This helps her create a nice bubble of warm air around her. So even if you have a big open barn with natural ventilation and it's a little cold, she can snuggle up in that deep bedded area where you're providing plenty of space for her to rest. And then lastly, we'd like to supplement with positive pressure tube systems. So we've had thousands installed across the United States. These mostly have been driven by farmers who have seen a reduction in treatment rates of about 25 to 75%. They're really relatively simple to install and fairly inexpensive and easy to run and maintain. So in this picture, you've just got a barn with 2 rows of individual calf pens with the single tube running down the middle that would be designed to deliver the minimum ventilation rate of 4 air changes an hour without creating a draft on the calf. So the air jets would be sized to come into the calf pen in about that front half and settle down so that she gets that fresh air without a chilling effect. So, you know, what makes these systems so special? And based on clinical experience, we have seen a reduction in endemic calf respiratory disease, and research out of Canada has shown that there was a 80% greater likelihood that a calf will be diagnosed with respiratory disease if there's no positive pressure tube system in the barn. So we know that they have an effect on calf health. They're also relatively low cost. They run 24/7, 365 days a year. Never want to turn them down. I know some people are afraid of the cold and think that these systems are going to chill the barn, but in fact, we've compared a barn that didn't have a system and one that did, and there were only 3 hours in the day where the system was, it was colder inside the barn than outside of the barn. So really minimal difference in terms of the indoor temperature of the barn with these tube systems running. So even in the dead of cold here in Wisconsin, we want to keep these on so that we have the benefit of fresh air. And so here's just a nice little diagram showing what's so great about bringing air in from the top. So when you have winter ventilation and the air is coming in through that small sidewall and going down, well, it's not going to get into the calf pen if there's any barriers in the way. So by bringing in that positive pressure tube system, you can direct the air to where the calf microenvironment is and not have to worry about any overhead obstructions. And so the idea of these systems is that the fan is placed on the end wall so that it only brings fresh outside air. We do not want to recirculate air inside of the calf barn. And then you would have this fan would pull air in down the length of the tube and evenly distribute air through those holes. There's a couple of different ways to design a ventilation system for a calf barn or any barn. You would either look at the airflow per animal or thinking about the air changes per hour in the barn. And based on our experience in our group, we favor designing systems based on changing the air in the barn a certain number of times. So for a positive pressure tube system, we'd be looking at a minimum 4 air changes an hour in the winter. And we've come up with a spreadsheet on how to design these systems, because they each have to be custom designed for your barn. And we've had a lot of VES-Artex representatives go through our course. Their names and many others are listed on the Dairyland Initiative website, where you can go and look, and they would be happy to help design a system for you and figure out what you need for your barn so that you have supplemental positive pressure ventilation year-round. And if you're looking for any more information about calf barn design or adult cow housing or lameness prevention, I recommend checking out our Dairyland Initiative website, which VES is a workshop sponsor of, and we greatly appreciate their support of our educational opportunities. So with that, I'm open to any questions.